Hi, I'm Eileen Cavanaugh. Welcome to Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers. We hope you enjoy this discussion of Minnesota literature.
Good.
Hello, welcome to Northern Lights. I'm Bill Brady, Executive Director of the Minnesota Library Association, here with Joe Amato, History Professor and Director of Rural and Regional Studies at Southwest State University in Marshall. And we're here today to talk about Joe's book on golf, Golf Beats Us All, So We Love It. Truly a unique book, Joe, in the golf business, and I was curious to know, obviously from the book, you have had a lifelong passion for the game, and wondered how you got exposed to the game originally.
Well, I had my, you might say, 2 feet on 2 different golf courses. One was a small local course that I played just rarely once in a while with the boys. It was flat, you had to bounce all the shots, it was hard as a rock, it was only a small little municipal course. And the other course was one of the great courses of Michigan, one of the great courses of the world, the Country Club of Detroit, the home course of the Fords. That's where I started to caddy when I was 11 years old, and so probably the day I began to caddy was the day I fell in love with that game. I mean, it was like playing at a great estate. It was a wonderful place, and it was visually great, and I took a liking to hitting balls and seeing where I could make them go.
So I bet you have some interesting caddy stories, and you talk about several different stories in the book. Could you tell the viewers one of your favorite stories?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, of course, the main drama, and we may get to that, is I thought I could be great and I could be a professional. So that's the main narrative. But the story, like any experience, an Army experience, was filled with its own language, its own kind of argumentations, its own odd things. A couple things that occurred to me is one day I was caddying for one of the who we referred to as Old Man Stroh. He was the owner of Stroh's Brewery. And he went into the third hole, deep into the rough, a lot of trees, mushrooms growing all up. It was November, and was looking for his ball, and before I could get to him, he'd managed to line himself up on a mushroom. And he took back his club, and I couldn't say anything, couldn't say, "Sir, stop swinging," so I had to let him go, and he hauled off, and he walloped this mushroom. And it just splattered the way a mushroom would, and then he said to me, "Caddy, where did the ball go?" I said, "Sir, you struck a mushroom." He said, "Oh," and then he, with this kind of Magoo-like posture, tremendous, really rotund, much more rotund than I, and couldn't see. Off he went in search of his real ball. And so he had a lot of experiences. I had Henry Ford and got the lowest tip any caddy had ever gotten in the history of the caddy house from him by trying to be clever and telling him in one difficult place he was located. When he asked for his advice, I told him, "Well, I think you should pray, sir. I think it's the only way out of this." And he didn't find that funny at all. He never talked to me for the rest of the round and gave me 50 cents when he gave the average caddy $1.50 tip.
Yeah. Well, being a caddy actually provided you the mechanism to get a college education. I was interested to read that story.
Yeah, we had, at that time, and it still exists, it's the largest scholarship maybe in the nation, which pays room and board. There was a famous amateur named Chick Evans, and he went on out of Chicago, with Chicago as the center, but it spread to the whole Midwest, and now is tied up with Western Golf. For the caddies, and you had to be, your parents couldn't be rich too, but if you were a caddy and you were doing, and you'd put in your service, you were eligible to go to schools like Northwestern, Michigan State, University of Illinois, great schools in the Midwest, and then later it spread out to the whole nation. And you got free tuition and room for 4 years. And wow. For some of us from the lower classes, not only didn't any of our cousins even go to college, we'd never even quite heard of a place called college. It turned out to be a tremendous boon, and a lot of us from the lower working classes, which we were, Italian, Slavic kids and that, we ended up going to great universities. Some of us flunked out, but a lot of us managed to make it through. And so it's a stunning scholarship. People should be aware of it. It's truly a case of it was, at least when I was there, of lower class kids making, out of hard work and the generosity of the philanthropic classes that we tend to be nasty to, nevertheless helping kids get a long way into the world.
Well, we're delighted to be here today at the Braemer Public Golf Course in Edina, and we're on the golf green. And one of the interesting parts of the book that I enjoyed was Joe's description of the green, which he calls the table of pain. and was wondering how you came up with that description. And
Well, there's never been a putt too short for a player not to miss. And sometimes actually to give a whack at a little one and miss it, actually turn what he thought was a 1-foot putt into a 3-foot putt. There's never been a tournament that hasn't been lost on a green. And things that seem incredible, people have made 4 and 5 putts. People in major tournaments, some of these tournaments are wonderful where the greens are really set up, but they've managed to putt off a green into a sand trap and lose the tournament and then whack it out of the sand trap and knock it out of bounds. I mean, the green though is where the pressure really is the tightest because the distances are short. Generally, you should be able to get a pretty good aim on the ball, although that's not always true too with all the questions of contours and grains, and there's a lot of variety of things that can upset your aiming. But generally, the ball's still, your stroke should be steady, the cup is really close by, generally speaking, and yet no matter how great you are, whole careers have been brought down. The great Varden, I mean, I think Varden was maybe the highest of all the golfers, was brought down because he couldn't make 3-foot putts. If somebody's interested in our time, Tom Watson would have gone from being a golfer who probably would have rivaled Nicklaus. I don't want to say excelled, but rivaled as a true champion. He couldn't make 4-foot putts anymore. They claim that other great players, the name is slipping in my mind right now, but more than one great player has lost his career on the putting green, or his career never took place because he could never get control of the putting green. As beautifully as he could hit the ball, he could never handle the putting green.
the table of pain.
The table of pain, yeah. I mean, golf is all kinds of pain. You show me any shot or any opportunity or tell me any story, and in almost any tournament, I mean, say there's 100 players who start in the tournament. There's 99 stories of pain, and even the guy who wins probably had 4 or 5 really awesome misstrokes, things that would have almost cost him the tournament. So he or she was under great pain or temptation even to despair at some point in the tournament. So golf is a lot about both self-inflicted and course-inflicted pain, but this is the area where it hurts the most on the green. If you practice with a lot of balls, then what happens is you don't pay attention to any of them. You begin to treat yourself like a factory. So when you practice putting, you should probably only practice with one ball and see what you do with the one and try and hit a nice shot with one ball. Like this. Let's see if this is a nice shot. Oh, terrible.
I take it.
Well, let's see if we can knock that one in. I hit it, but didn't knock it in. Let's see if I can knock it in this time. Too hard. That's not bad. That's 2 out of 3. What do you expect?
Well, as a self-acclaimed duffer myself, someone that I would hope the viewers probably can relate to, that plays a handful of times a summer, I was interested in your talk in the book about tips, because people that don't play very much golf are always looking for tips, and you talked about how tips are kind of overrated, and tips on the swing are overrated.
Yeah, well, tips are a fun thing to talk about because they rest on the totally false premise that, one, you can get a clear idea in your head. Nobody has clear ideas in their head, or rarely. But then the second thing is, if you get a clear idea in your head and you tell your body to do it, your body will obey. And then it's based on the premise that you actually can, if you have a clear idea and you actually are talking to your body will understand the language. Then if it does understand it, it'll tend to do it with access. So it'll get this arm so rigid that the whole swing follows a rigid arm. Or it'll get the head so still it'll rigidify the whole body. I mean, there's no tip that can't screw up a golfer. There's no tip that can't be exaggerated. And then there's a whole industry of tips. And one tip leads in one direction, the other tip leads in the others. And actually people become tip junkies. They just give pros hundreds and thousands of dollars a year only to saw off the leg of the table, the proverbial leg that leaves the other 3 too short, or too, in that case, too long, the other 3. And so tips, and also knowing how to give a tip is very subtle. I mean, you just can't say, well, lead with your left hip. What does that mean, lead with your left hip? Or keep your left arm fairly firm so you coil these back muscles. Well, how firm is firm?
Yeah.
So it deals with a very precise language, and a lot of times people just say things, they do things, and it works usually for about 6 or 7 shots. Like a new club usually will work for about the first 6 or 7 shots. Then you go back to your normal swing.
That's what I.
Well, I mean, I think that's just the nature of things.
Yeah.
Usually when you got a new tip or a new club, you slow down a little bit and you give your body a chance to coil and uncoil, which is the core of the golf swing. If you don't get your body coiled properly, then it can't uncoil properly. If you rush the uncoiling, things get out of sequence, you have trouble. So this coiling mechanism, though, is very fine. You just can't say, I want it, therefore I can have it. It deals maybe with years and deals with natural gifts. But most tips, if they get in the way of this rhythm that goes with the coil and the uncoil, they work for a little while because they tend to make you slow down and focus. But once you get back to your normal speed, right back where you started again, except $50 more. Well, we're going to talk about chipping here. And so Bill's going to chip one, and then I'm going to tell him what he should be doing after he chips it, okay? Well, you better try another, and then we'll talk about it.
The first one I practiced did real well.
Yeah, you did real well on the first one.
I did what you told me I was going to do.
Okay. Well, we could talk about this for a second if you want.
We try one more.
Try one more, yeah. Now, make sure you go through the ball.
Okay.
I mean, there's no golf swing without a follow-through unless it's a chop-down shot. Okay, it's 3 times as long as it should be, but you got the idea. This is the most common thing that beginners do with chip shots is they have a very long backswing. And the long backswing then forces them with the choice of how can they just slow down ever so gradually so they don't hit it so far, or they do what you did on the first. They stop actually before they get to the ball, or they dig a giant chunk of turf. What you want is, and you could try this now, is a very short backswing, so you're only coming back to where my hand is, not much further than that. You keep your club low, and you come back to my hand, and then you go through, and you have to go through. Your club should be accelerating. It's always accelerating when you're hitting a golf ball. So you need a short backswing, and then you can chip through. That's better because even if you miss it, at least it hasn't stopped there and gone 20 feet further. But you want a short backswing, not so short that you feel pinched, but fairly short and go through. That was a nice chip. It was a little too long still, but that had a nice stroke to it and looked pretty good. You only want to get back for a shot about this if you can with a foot, no further than a foot. If you're further than a foot, see, you were about 18 inches back, that's why your ball went too far. See, if I had one of these, and I'm not chipping so hot these days, I haven't done this for a couple of weeks, so I'm not warmed up, but I'm only going back about a foot, maybe 14 inches. And I just want to keep steady, and you do that real well. You kind of stay steady, keep your knees bent. That keeps a nice plane. You always want to keep your knees bent through a swing to the very end. You might come up. And just keep your head steady, and you take it back kind of easy.
I'd take that.
And so you it's just a nice, simple, easy mechanism, but you want it back a little bit and then through, but you're always back through. But through is always accelerating. You never want to get in the situation you're trying to decelerate, and nobody can control that. Even the best player in the world, and occasionally they do get rare shots where they're hitting these high cut shots, like we're going to hit it right up over Dave now as he's talking. There might be almost a deceleration there, but those are extremely delicate shots. And you want to hit this almost as easy as you hit a putt. It's just back and through, back and through.
Thanks.
Okay, is that a chipping tip for today?
In terms of practice, what kind of time frame? For serious golfers, what kind of time frame?
I think a serious golfer probably needs to be out at the course maybe an hour before a tournament. None of us ever do it, but if you're serious, I think you need to hit through about 50 balls, and you need to jiggle around out here for at least 20 minutes to get a little rhythm. A lot of it's just rhythm. You're either maybe too fast, or your body's a little sluggish, but once you find that level of rhythm, you can kill yourself with too much pre-practice. You can get too worked up on the practice range. I don't think the day before you're playing, or I mean immediately before you're playing, you want to bring too much intensity. Say you start missing little putts like these 3 on the practice. thing and you carry that attitude out to the course, right away you're fighting yourself, and you don't want to go out on the course fighting your swing, or you're going to fight yourself all the way. You're going to go back and forth. So a guy wants to practice to loosen up, get a little confidence, not feel the ball is formed. You're not going to correct anything. It's like sort of like studying just before an exam. You got to watch that.
A golfer that plays maybe once or twice a week, I mean, is it really worthwhile to take one trip a week to the driving range? I mean, is that...
Oh yeah, I think one trip a week, just to keep up his general confidence, about once a week, at least it lets him know that he can hit the ball solidly, maybe not quite as straight or do as much as he wants, but at least he can hit the ball solidly. And the other thing that the golfer might be able to do is, in that week, just get a little, I don't know, work on something that gives him a little confidence. Maybe choose one club, develop that, but once a week, probably keep him in play. On the other hand, you can choose if you reach a high enough level, you can go on pot luck as long as you're willing to be about 4 strokes off your game. If say you're a 75 shooter, odds are a 75 shooter is going to know enough about the game and been around long enough. After 2-3 holes, they're going to be warmed up, and they're going to probably end up shooting 80 even without any warm-up or having played for a month, unless it's a totally new course. I mean, it just depends what the golfer wants. I mean, kind of getting an idea of the course can help him right at the beginning too. If it's a hard course and your shots, what we say in golf, don't stick on the green, I mean, you've got to get that in your head before you tee off, because if you're going to keep trying to stick balls on the green, they're never going to stick. They're going to keep rolling over, and that's going to keep costing you strokes. So if somebody tells you in the pro shop, hey, all the trouble's on the backside of the greens. Well, if you've got that in your mind on the course, that's worth a lot of practicing, because you're never going to hit long. And if you never hit long, you're never going to lose 2 strokes on a hole. You might lose 1 to a weak shot in front. You're never going to lose 2. That's going to save you strokes. So a lot of the things, if you're a good golfer, you can pick up even as you drive into a course. You can kind of see where they're setting the pins that day. If the pin's up in front or they back and deep. And that's all helpful information that comes in play. Hey, don't cut that, edit it.
In the book, there's so much philosophy in the book, and one of the things that I enjoyed was the talk in the book about the honesty that golf makes you, or dishonest that golf, makes you be. You're out there with yourself. And can you elaborate on that?
Well, I do think finally, at some core, golf is a solitary game, or has at least a deep internal reflex to it. The ball is still. The ball's sitting here. You have a shot to make. You have to be honest enough to conceive the shot. Sometimes you'll have a ball here, you'll have where you're going there, be it the pin or some place you're trying to pitch out to, and you can't see it. And you know right away you're being dishonest. You don't even know what you want the ball to do. You start with a lie. But then sometimes you see it, and you end up getting where you want to get, but you know you got there with a different shot. So it gets very internal, golf. The ball's still. You should have visions of what you're planning to do, and you should be able to do it. That's the way it's solitary. It's also solitary is in the sense that you're actually in control of the vision, the ball, and the final accounting system. And finally, you're pretty much on your own when you're not just in the woods, but you're over in the rough, or you walk into the sand trap. If your club accidentally touches, well, what I just did would be a 2-stroke penalty. If I go like this on a green, I'm finding out which way the grain goes. 2-stroke penalty. Wow. Touch it. So, I mean, if nobody sees me go like that, then of course I got a question of conscience, don't I? So, I mean, golf is very internal that way. It's always pushing towards the integrity of the shot, the integrity of what you expect from yourself and what you produce, and then just the honesty of facing up to what you've done. Oh, I had maybe a 6 on the hole when you had a 12. I mean, there's different people lie in different ways, but you show me a golfer, and at least I'll show you somebody tempted to lie in one way or another. Take a free shot, kick the ball up a little bit, always claim the round was bad, although they always have bad rounds, but always inferring that there's a good round that they're not telling you about. I mean, honesty in golf, almost the twain never shall meet, at least perfectly.
And yet, the solitary golfer, which is throughout the book, and yet you talk also about golf being developing a community, and I was interested in that.
Well, I think for the people who know the game, they can bend shots, they know greens, they know grasses, they know what tournament pressure's like, they just understand, you might say, the craft and the art of the game, and they've practiced it. That forms a community of language, a community of experience that they know. I mean, if a person can never fade a shot on purpose or never hook a shot on purpose, or they don't know how to hit a shot up high or control it down low, they still may roughly know about golf, but they're not like in the inner kingdom. If they've never missed a 3-foot putt that has almost made them cry or fall down in pain, then they're not really quite golfers yet. I mean, there's a whole, like anything, I mean, it could be any sport or hobby, there's an inside to it, and golf does form a community. And if you've never played a great course, like say a Scottish seaside course, one of the great ones, or one of our great courses, we've got many courses around here that are great right in Minnesota, but if you've never played the greater courses, you just don't quite know the full game. So there is a kind of, what should we say, a fraternity or a sorority of the golf.
Joe, readers of the book, what sorts of things would you hope that they would ascertain from the book?
Well, I'd like to see them, aside from getting a richer understanding of the game, both the mental side of the game, play side, and just the culture around it. One of the things I'd like them to see is what are their pleasures in the game. I think it's very important that a golfer understand what he's enjoying about the game and not. I think a lot are playing, but they're not often harvesting the pleasures they want. In fact, I think sometimes they're out on the course or around the club or hanging around the clubhouse, and they're not really having the fun they really could have, or the pleasure. They're doing something else rather than having the fun of the game. And I think that can vary considerably from player to player, but there's also so many abstractions and obsessions around the game, or temptations, gambling only being one of them, alcohol another, but there's other temptations of just getting in bad social situations and not being able to get out of them, or there's putting on yourself a kind of a harness of perfection that you're never going to fulfill, yet you constantly wear this harness. So this book is a chance for golfers to get back into themselves. I'm not trying to do anything in depth psychology or anything, but get back inside themselves, kind of take a general sense look at what is it I enjoy about the game, or maybe I should take a year off the game and go do something else. But I would hope that would bring them into the book. The other thing I'd hope it might do is the game, it would put them a little more in contact with the possibility of a quiet and more solitary golf. The game is being so commercial at every level. The courses are beginning to look more and more like arboretums rather than golf courses. The clubhouses are looking more like social centers than they are golf clubhouses, and just the driving of the carts and the taking away of the roughs. The game is really becoming quite organized, quite managed, and another aspect in which cash drives out everything else.
Sure.
And so if they can regain the roots of the golf, they might regain some of the pleasures of the game too.
I also enjoyed the tremendous number of golf stories that are just interwoven through, all parts of the book. And I know this maybe is putting you on the spot, but could you give the viewers maybe one of your favorite stories that you...
My favorite, I think, is a clipping from the Detroit Times from 1937. It described Walter Hagen and his wife's divorce. And I don't know if it's bannered for the whole paper or just the sports section, but Walter Hagen's wife said, "Never marry a golfer." And the article below described why. Every time she'd have a dinner party, golf would turn out to be the dominant subject, and all the guests would end up gripping their forks and spoons as Walter gave them instructions on how to prove their grips. And as a result, that wrecked plenty of dinner party. And then Walter had a very unfortunate habit. Before he'd go to bed, he would go around the bedroom in front of the mirrors practicing swinging in his briefs. Well, I don't think that created an amorous flight in his wife's heart. So as a result, golf stole Hagen's marriage, but it is a kind of a inappropriate swing I think he was engaged in.
Joe, we appreciate you being with us today and talking about golf, and the book is Golf Beats Us All, and So We Love It.
Thank you for having me, and when you become the world's best chipper, I want you to attribute it to Golf Beats Us All, and So We Love It. Thanks for having me.
I'll make sure you get the credit.
Thank you very much.
We'd like to take a minute to talk about a couple of other books that Joe has authored. A book entitled To Call It Home, The New Immigrants of the Southwestern Minnesota. Joe, could you give the viewers some ideas about what this book is about?
Well, I did this collectively and had the help of many, 4 others, John Meyer, John Radulowski, Donata DeBrooker, and my son Anthony. And we took up this project, as we do many projects at Southwest State, just because we felt it needed to be done and nobody else was doing it. All sorts of new immigrants were coming in. They were particularly related to the meat processing industry, and it's even though it's centralizing as an industry, the actual plants are being dispersed. And this brought into just a range of towns in southwestern Minnesota all kinds of new immigrants from distant places, Africa, the center of Mexico, Asia, and with them came all sorts of questions, all sorts of new cultural encounters, not all pleasant, and of course housing problems, police problems, social welfare problems. And no one was providing any data. Everyone was either disinterested, angry about it, or saying they cared, but no one was doing a study. So we did a study, and we figured that our need was to provide a preliminary study of who these people were, what numbers were they coming in, did we already see patterns in schools, see patterns in police, patterns in housing, and what we tried to do is provide a base work so policymakers and others could discuss it. And we've done that with other books. We did it on the flood of '93. We've done it with ethnic groups in southwestern Minnesota. So I see this work as a collective effort that we're trying as individuals and a university to make us aware of what's happening in our area.
And another book, Victims and Values.
Yeah. This is a more complex work and maybe even a bit quarrelsome, but I simply wanted to argue that suffering is a way that human beings, something they live with, and it's a way they transact values. In fact, it constitutes some of the most important exchanges and gifts we have. At another level, suffering constitutes some of the most powerful moral rhetoric we have. It's almost the opposite of power rhetoric. So the notion that we've suffered, therefore we deserve, or we've suffered, it entitles us to this knowledge, or it entitles us to this compensation, or it entitles us to salvation, or we've suffered, therefore it entitles us as a church to dispense grace. Suffering is a very old thing that's been claimed for a long, long time, and what this was an attempt to do is talk about the rhetorics and discourses of suffering since even before the Greeks. Obviously the Hebrews, Christian culture. It's a Western culture book. I make no attempts to talk about rhetorics of suffering in the Orient, and they do exist there as well, but I just stayed in the West. And what it was, again, it was a kind of a practical work. It's a very complex work, I think, but it's an attempt to cast some light on this discussion of victims. I mean, we have begun to use the word victims and suffering, and people are outraged, and they use it as if they're the first victims, as if this gives them some exclusive hold over reality. And I just think they need to be conscious of that language, both as people who are hearing it or as people who are putting it out. We shouldn't be buffaloed by it, but yet we should recognize it's very serious and deep language, but it's an old thing. It's very deep. We can trace it across the Christian church and so on. So that's what this book is about. It's for readers, it's for someone who has a bit of a bend towards serious history and serious philosophy. Otherwise, I think they'll get thrown off along the...
Well, thanks for being with us today, Joe. On
Thank
behalf
you,
of Northern
Bill.
Lights, we enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Bill, very much.